You may know Dana White.
Dana White.
Dana White.
Dana White.
Dana White.
Sushi's from Japan. He's from the Philippines, dummy. Fucking scumbag. Pay your fucking fighter what you owe him. That's your job.
Ariel Helwani is one of the weakest human beings on planet Earth.
I think it's disgusting. I think he's disgusting, and I never want to see him reffing ever again.
I don't give a fuck.
But did you know that in 2022, Dana White was told that he had 10 years to live?
I like food. I've been flying around the world eating all the best food, going to the best restaurants that you could go to. And then when you get in your 50s, you don't realize how that shit just catches up with you. You know, I had all this stuff wrong with me over the last couple of years. And randomly, she calls me one day and she's like, you know, I love you. You're one of my best friends. I can never repay you for what you've done for me and all this stuff. I'm going to introduce you to somebody that you need to meet. His name is Gary Brecka. Basically, they send these guys in like him. They do these tests on you and they know when you're going to die. And they're right within a month. This guy sat down. He knows nothing about my medical history. I told him nothing about how I feel, what's going on. He sat down for 3 hours.
And he starts going through my blood work, and he starts telling me everything that's wrong with me.
And then he said, so do you want to know, how many years you have left? And I'm like, yeah.
He said, if you stay on this trajectory that you're on,
he gave me 10.4 years.
You're going to live another 10.4 years.
But what got Dana White to this point, where he was on the brink of death? What type of lifestyle was he living? And how did he manage to fix his life before it was too late? Let's take a look into the life of the UFC's CEO and how he changed his life before it was too late.
When you love something and you're very passionate about it, and you know exactly what it is you want to do, you just get up every day and start grinding until it happens.
Dana was born in Connecticut and grew up in Connecticut and Massachusetts, where he was raised by his mother June and her family alongside his sister.
You were born in 1969 to a 19-year-old high school dropout mum.
Dana White was a good guy. Guys liked him, girls liked him. He just had this great personality. People were attracted to him. They wanted to be his friend. They like hanging out with him.
I came from a family with a single mom. My mother was a nurse, and we lived back east in Massachusetts. My mother, she worked a lot, wasn't around, so me and my sister were home a lot alone. We had to clean the house and do all the stuff that you have to do when you're a kid. But one of the things I think about growing up alone is, there's a lot of stuff that you have to learn on your own.
But on the other hand, Dana's father, Dana White Sr., was an alcoholic and was rarely present in his life.
You had a 21-year-old alcoholic father who left the home, I think, when you were 7 or 8 years old.
My dad was an alcoholic and was never around, and when he did show up, you didn't want him around. I had my dad and his side of the family were all role models for me about what I didn't want to do and what I didn't want to be.
Had to go to church and all that stuff growing up. I was an altar boy when I was younger.
But I honestly wouldn't change one thing about the way that I grew up. If I didn't grow up the way that I did, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Eventually, his family relocated to Las Vegas because the city offered better payout for nurses.
And at the time, they were paying nurses more in Las Vegas than anywhere else in the country. So she packed up the car and the kids and the dog, and we all moved out here. I was like 10 years old. This is like 78 or 79. I didn't like school in general. I barely got through high school, and that's how I ended up in Vegas. And I stayed here until I was 16. Then I went back east again, kicked around.
After graduating from Bishop Gorman High School in 1987, Dana enrolled twice into college. First enrolling into Quincy College and then the University of Massachusetts, Boston, but would drop out of both after his first semester.
So I said, let me give college a shot. I didn't last, it didn't work, so.
What didn't you like about it?
I didn't like anything about it. School, I felt like school never taught me anything, and I never had the focus.
But following this, Dana would get into boxing, and by the time he had this aspiration, he had already worked as an asphalt installer, a bouncer, and bellhop at the Boston Harbor Hotel.
From the time that I was 17 till I turned 19,
I actually had a lot of jobs. I was a bouncer and ended up at the Boston Harbor Hotel. I was a bellman there when I was 18, 19 years old. I worked at the Four Seasons as a bellman. I did paving, the guys that go out and pave the road.
EJ paving?
EJ paving, the hardest job I've ever had in my life. But I was 19, I was standing in that lobby and I was just like, man, I hate this job and this isn't me. Yeah, well, I think when you're young, those are all the type of jobs you have to do. Number one, to find out what hard work really is. And number two, to find out what it is you don't want to do in life. And I said, why am I here? I don't want to do this anymore. So I literally walked out the front door and my buddy's like, where are you going? I said, I'm quitting. He's like, are you crazy? Why are you quitting? I said, I want to get in the fight business. And of course, everybody thought that was the stupidest idea in the world. It's not where I belong. And I know lots of people have felt that way before about their jobs. The difference between me and a lot of people is I got up and walked out and said, I wanted to be in the fight business. I wanted to be in the fight business, which at the time was 1988 or 1989. Sounded like the dumbest idea ever. That's what I wanted. At one point, I wanted to be a fighter. But there was no specific one thing that I wanted to do. I just knew that that's what I wanted to do and that's what would make me happy. And I went after it. And you probably couldn't have a worse idea. I sought out this guy in South Boston. His name was Peter Welsh. He's a fighting legend back there. He took me in and taught me everything he knew. And what we did was we started this Get Kids Off the Street program. Basically, it was called the Muni, which was the municipal courthouse in Southie. And Peter and I did a deal with the city where we got the space underneath the courthouse, which was all this whole concrete area. We put a ring in there, there were bags and everything else. And what we used to do was we used to bring kids in off the streets. And Boston is very segregated, especially back then. You're talking, back in the late 80s. And we used to bring kids in from all the different areas to come in and box. And we wanted these kids to get to meet each other and respect each other through boxing. So to pay the bills, we used to bring in businessmen, housewives, whoever it was, and train them to box. And it was basically, we were like personal trainers, but you did boxing. And one day I'm actually in there teaching a class, and these guys literally walk right into the middle of the class. So we need to talk to you. I'm like, I'm teaching a class. We need to talk to you. I'm thinking, these guys own the club or something. So I leave the class, I go out and start talking to them, and they start asking me if I know who they are. And I don't. But it was Kevin. I'm sure you've heard of Kevin Weeks. It was Kevin Weeks. And that was it, man. They wanted some money. They walked away that day, and I was thinking, man, I don't even want to know these guys.
What do you do?
I ignored them. I didn't do anything. I wasn't going out of my way to try to bump into them again or to do anything else. And then one day, I was sitting in my apartment and I got a phone call, and they basically told me, we want the money. And I said, I don't have the money. It was $2,500, which was like $25,000 to me in those days, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they said, well, get it from your girlfriend, she doesn't have it, well, get it from somebody. Like, yeah, well, you got till tomorrow. You got till tomorrow, which was a Sunday. The next day was gonna be a Sunday. You got till tomorrow at 1 o'clock to give us the money. So I literally, that day, I bought a plane ticket and came back to Vegas.
However, Dana would give up on his boxing aspirations, which led him onto managing boxing gyms, taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons, and managing fighters.
So at the time, I was managing guys, right? Boxers and MMA fighters. Oddly enough, before I had ever really done anything, I owned gyms and was in the training business.
I think the biggest year I'd had when I was a trainer was like 450 grand.
People have always come to me and asked me to help them do something.
Yeah.
So it happened in the fight world. I had these gyms and I was training people and fighters would come to me.
And it was during this time where Dana would attend a wedding that would change his life forever.
I had this blanket policy. When you get into your 20s, everybody starts getting fucking married. All your friends. I didn't go to anybody's wedding.
This kid, Adam Corrigan, used to drive me to school every day.
And he had money, I didn't have money, and he was always a good dude.
And he was getting married. But this guy was so good to me growing up, there was no way I couldn't go to his wedding.
This dude had to wake up an hour earlier every day to drive me to school. Yeah. Never forgot that. People who do things for me like that, I never forget.
I went to his wedding and I bumped into the Fertitta brothers.
Lorenzo Fertitta comes up to me and says, hey, how you been? And this and that, good. We hadn't seen each other since high school.
You guys went to high school together. That's another thing a lot of people don't even fucking realize.
Mm-hmm.
And Lorenzo said, I heard you're training people.
I just got on the athletic commission. I would love to come train with you. I said, let's do it on Monday.
We got together that Monday after the wedding, and we've been together ever since. One night, me and Frank Fertitta went out to the Hard Rock here in Las Vegas, and we saw John Lewis, who was the only guy in Vegas at the time that had a jiu-jitsu studio. And Frank said, I've always wanted to learn ground fighting. So I said, yeah, me too. So we went over, I knew him, we started talking to him, and we set up a lesson for Monday to start taking jiu-jitsu. And me, Frank, and Lorenzo all went and became addicted. We became obsessed with it, obsessed. We started training 3-4 days a week.
But this wasn't all. Remember how I mentioned how Dana White was managing fighters? Well, the fighters he was managing were Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell, who were both fighting in the UFC. However, during a dispute with the UFC's owners at the time over Tito's contract, Dana would learn about the company's financial situation and realized it was close to bankruptcy. As former owner Bob Marowitz flipped out, stating there's no more money, which is when Dana would discuss with the Fertitta brothers about buying the UFC.
Through John Lewis, he started bringing in BJ Penn, and Chuck. We started to meet all these guys. And we started training with them. Then we went to a UFC event. Then we went to our first UFC event, and we sat in the crowd and started to go, man, imagine if they did this, and imagine if they did that. This thing could be big. So at the time, I had 3 gyms here in Vegas, and where we trained fighters and people, you guys like you could come in and work out. And I started representing some of the UFC guys. So I was representing Tito Ortiz at the time, right? And I got into a huge contract battle with the old owner, Bob Meyerowitz, over Tito's contract. Tito had got fucked over by them because he showed up to a fight and he was supposed to be paid a certain amount of money. Well, the fight didn't do well. So right before the fight goes off, they went back and told him, yeah, we're not paying you what we told you we were gonna pay you. We're gonna pay you this instead. And he's like, well, then I won't fucking fight. And they said, then don't fight. Doesn't matter, we don't care. We're not gonna make any money on this event anyway.
So they're hemorrhaging money.
So Tito had to fight. So he fought. So I'm going in negotiating his new contract, and I'm trying to get them to pay him the money that they fucked him on that fight, right? And then finally he flipped out and said, you know what? There is no more fucking money. I don't even know if I have enough money to put on another event, and screaming at me. And I hung up the phone and I was like, damn, all right. And through that, I found out that the UFC was in trouble. I literally hung up the phone, picked it back up, called the Fertitta brothers and said, I think the fucking UFC's in trouble. I think they're gonna go under, and I think we could buy the company, and I think we should. So I connected Lorenzo with Bob Meyerowitz. They started talking, and a month later we owned the company. So the brothers put up the money. They bought it, $2 million. Then they sat me down and said, we want you to be the president of the company, and we want you to run it, and they gave me 10% of the upside.
After buying out the company with the Fertitta brothers, Dana would become the president of the UFC with a 10% stake in the company. But buying out the UFC didn't come without its many complications.
Nobody believed in this thing. When I say nobody, except for 2 guys, Frank and Lorenzo. I mean, the early days of building this company and building the sport, it was the Wild Wild West, man. It was crazy back then. Yeah, I was literally at war every day. Well, no, because we paid $2 million for it. Sounds cheap now, but back then, and then had to invest another $44 million into it before it turned around. Yeah, so when we first bought the company, you can imagine, I said we weren't even allowed on pay-per-view. What venues do you think wanted us? No venues wanted the UFC. And we had a vision for this thing. We were big fight fans, and we believed that if this was done the right way, this could be the biggest sport in the world. Our goal was to get this thing on free TV. At the time when we bought it, it wasn't allowed on pay-per-view. So at the time, before we bought it, the old owner, he had all this marketing, the most brutal, violent sport in the world, 2 men enter the cage, 1 man leaves. It was great for marketing in the early days. They did big pay-per-view numbers, but then Senator John McCain went after him. Instead of running toward regulation, they ran away from regulation. They would go to states where there were no athletic commissions, and you can only mess with the government for so long before they get you. We agreed with Senator John McCain when we bought the company, and we ran toward regulation, and we wanted to get this thing regulated by all the athletic commissions, not only in the country, but throughout the world. But at the time, this guy Bob Meyerowitz had stripped this thing down to all we bought were those 3 letters, which the trademark really wasn't even that strong at the time, old wooden octagon, and 10 or 12 contracts. At the time when we bought it for $2 million, we were literally the fucking redheaded stepchild of the Fertitta portfolio. Like every, smart fucking, numbers fucking geek that worked for the Fertittas hated this investment, thought it was ridiculous, and that the Fertittas were gonna lose all their money. Every fucking one of them. There's a lot of people that run around now claiming, oh, the UFC, I believe, yeah.
No.
Nobody fucking, there were 3 guys that believed in it. Me, Frank, and Lorenzo. So all the rights, the DVD rights, which ended up being massive, the video game rights, and all the old library was owned by Lionsgate. He had stripped it down to keep it alive. We had to go back and negotiate those rights from Lionsgate. And we started talking to these guys. If you think about it, if you're Lionsgate and you believe that this thing could do anything,
you're never gonna.
Why would you give up those rights?
Right.
When we bought these rights back, that's when the DVD business went like this. The first fucking checks we started to get were from DVDs.
Yeah.
Wow. When the DVD business took off, we were getting $2 million fucking checks. So they sold it back to us for $2 million. But Frank, Lorenzo, and I then all had to learn the production business. We'd never put on a fight. We'd never done production. Now it was just a matter of building it. And the problem is, number one, when you want to do what we did, and number two, when you want to do what we did and you don't know what the fuck you're doing, it's expensive, right? So every time you put on a show, it's a couple $1 million. We were doing 5 events a year, which was a lot for us when we first started. Back then when we were doing the 5, we were doing them in Vegas or Atlantic City, that's it. So,
are you losing immediately?
A few years in, you're upside down $40 million fucking dollars. I got the phone call one day from Lorenzo.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know if we can keep doing this, man. This is fucking, So we're losing money on the shows. We're losing money on overhead, the expenses for the office and employees, and every way that you could possibly lose money in a business, we're fucking losing money. The lowest point was when Lorenzo called me and said, I can't keep funding this thing, man. I can't call my brother again to ask him to fund this thing. I need you to get out there and see what we can get for this thing. I started making calls all that day. And I call him back at the end of the day, and I'm like, 6 or 7 million? He says, all right, I'll talk to you tomorrow. So he hangs up the phone, and I'm like, this is a fucking wrap. This is fucking, it's over. He called me the next day and said, let's do it. Let's keep going.
However, it wasn't until one massive decision was made that Dana White and the UFC would finally see the shift it was looking for, and they would drag themselves out of the $40 million of debt they were in.
We start working really hard on trying to figure out how to get on fucking television, because we think that that's the key to success. We believe that if we get on free television, more people will see this, love it like we do, and it'll work. So reality television was big at the time. We knew we had to get on television. It wasn't allowed on pay-per-view. How do you get it on free TV? And reality just started to get big. At the time, the Nashville network just switched over to Spike TV, which they were calling the men's network. I mean, if we don't fit there, where do we fit? So we go and pitch the guys on it. Spike hates it. They don't like it. And we remember that day, we talk about it all the time. These guys it was in LA, and they were going to the fucking Dodgers game that day. And they could not get out of this fucking meeting fast enough to go see the Dodgers play. So we called them back 3 days later and said, well, what if we put up the 10 million ourselves? They liked that idea better. So we put up the 10 million, and it was the last 10 million that the Fertittas were gonna invest in the sport. So many problems with Spike TV at the time, right? Because halfway through the season, the president of the company got fired. All the things that we thought we were going to get that year, we had this runaway hit show. By episode 5, when the big blowout with Chris Lieben and Koscheck happens, we do 2.1 million viewers. And normally at that time, when you would see runaway hit shows, there'd be commercials, it'd be on billboards, it'd be on the side of buses in LA and New York. We got none of that. We're sweating it the whole fucking season right up to the finale. We have no new deal. These guys have fucking promised us nothing. We have nothing. We go into the finale. The finale starts out, Diego Sanchez runs through Kenny Florian like it was nothing. All the fights have been fucking meh. Then Forrest and Stephan Bonner come out in the main event and just start going fucking
crazy,
toe to toe, knock down, drag them out. The fucking people are stomping their feet in the arena. It sounds like a train's going through the fucking place. It goes right to the fucking decision. They read off the scorecards. Forrest Griffin fucking narrow inches it out and wins the fight. I give them both a fucking contract. Place is going crazy. Oh, by the way, the crowd is chanting one more round, all this shit. When that fight was over, I swear to God, I was like, I don't even give a fuck. We're gonna end up somewhere now after this fight. And we didn't even make it out of the building that night. The guys who were there from Spike TV took us out, literally took us out in the alley. We were in an alley out by the Cox Pavilion. We go out in the alley, we do our television deal on a fucking napkin in the alley. The thing blows up, and because we paid for it, we owned 100% of everything. We owned all the rights, and so it was actually a blessing that they didn't like it. So then, this is 2005. Okay. I can't remember which it was, 2006 or 7. We're in a fucking budget meeting, and let me tell you what you didn't want to be in. We're budget meetings the first 5 years of fucking UFC. So we're in this budget meeting, and Lorenzo is up writing on his whiteboard, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, wait a minute. Does that say I'm gonna make $1 million this year?
Therefore, finally, the UFC began to see the shift that it had needed. But as the UFC kept growing, it would only continue to reach a larger audience.
UFC. Well, I think the UFC's blown up the way that it has because it's exciting. I mean, it's great on television, and the live event is the best live sporting event you will ever see. But we are a lot different in that not only me, but the UFC lets everybody look behind the curtain.
However, it wasn't until the rise of one of the most charismatic men in sports and the controversies surrounding him where the sport would truly begin to see its major mainstream growth.
Who the f*** is that guy? Who the f*** is that? I want everyone in this arena to scream at the top of your lungs. The Mayweathers! What you gonna do? Oh, what? You gonna do something over there?
Not by you anyway, you little fool, whoever you are.
I was just giggling at his little soft body. I've never seen a skinny guy. How can a fat guy be so skinny at the same time? I've never...
Shut your mouth, you'll do nothing. You'll do nothing. Not one of you will do nothing. Get the out of here! Come on, you
And through it all, Dana White was the man overlooking the UFC, even after selling the company in 2016 to Endeavor for $4 million.
I didn't want to do it, and the Fertittas were ready to get out, and they were like, and here was the thing, they had a sit down with me, and they're basically like, we had everybody in here going through the deal. Everybody was in here kicking the tires, looking to buy it, from ESPN to Turner to all these different funds and groups from all over the world, and they sat me down and said, we're going to sell this thing, and we're ready to go, but nobody will take it unless you stay. So you have to stay. Wow. You have to do this. When this deal closed, it bugged me out a little bit. Why? I don't know. It just, when you make that kind of money and your parent, my partners, I've been with them for 20 years.
Right.
So that's all going to change. I have new partners now.
But even though Dana thought he had done it all, one major obstacle would stand in his way. Something Dana had neglected for so long. And although he had everything he could ever imagine, in 2022, Dana White was told he only had 10 years left to live.
Right, I was in bad shape. I was on blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine, thyroid medicine, and I never felt good. I was always tired, my legs were all messed up, my triglycerides were off the charts, and I was taking pills. And I met this guy named Gary Brecka. I found out that he could tell you when you're gonna die. Yeah. I was like... They do these tests on you, and they know when you're gonna die, and they're right within a month. This guy sat down, he knows nothing about my medical history. He sat down for 3 hours. And he starts going through my blood work, and he starts telling me everything that's wrong with me. And then he said, so do you want to know, how many years you have left? And I'm like, yeah. He said, if you stay on this trajectory that you're on, he gave me 10.4 years. You're gonna live another 10.4 years.
And if he didn't change his lifestyle and the way he was living, his life would be cut significantly short. This realization would shift White's perspective. Therefore, after neglecting his health for so long, Dana White decided to change his life.
Me and my wife truly believed that he was wrong, and I didn't have that long. Thought I had less.
But he was optimistic.
Yeah, he was being overly optimistic.
Yeah.
I mean, so Dana had a common precursor for cardiovascular disease called metabolic syndrome. It's actually the leading cause of cardiovascular disease, which is the leading cause of death worldwide. And it's a combination of 5 things: abdominal obesity, low healthy cholesterol, low HDL cholesterol, elevated insulin and blood sugar, elevated cholesterol, and hypertension. To have any 2 of those 5 is, you're considered to have metabolic syndrome. It's something you should get addressed. It's why I think everybody should get data on their bodies. He started exercising again. He went on a keto reset diet. The majority of what Dana did was really what Dana did himself. We did 3 big things with Dana. We did hormone balance, we did nutrient deficiencies, and we did glycemic control, or control his blood sugar. So he went on a strict keto reset diet. So he went on a strict keto diet. He had a strict exercise and workout routine.
I mean, what have you lost?
Forget it. I lost 30 pounds.
Yeah. You're dieting, though. In addition to the 10X,
I'm doing keto, yeah. Gary tells me, you don't feel incredible. This is what normal's supposed to feel like.
Yeah, exactly.
I wake up in the morning.
I love that.
I do the cold plunge.
Okay.
I do the alkaline pad. I do the oxygen. And then I do the red light. And then I do my workout.
But without fixing his health, everything that Dana had built may have been for nothing. Therefore, because he fixed his health, everything else in his life could flourish because of it. His relationships, his family life, his connections, and his business. And if you like this video, please subscribe and click the video on the screen for more.
Anything can be done.
That's right.
Anything can be done. Nothing can't be done. Don't ever tell me we can't do it. No, it can't be done.
Figure it out.
It's not true.